As we in the Western world are currently watching two wars play out, one thing is clear to me. Russia and Ukraine need to remain the primary focus, especially when it comes to U.S. foreign policy. I 100% support Israel in their endeavor to destroy Hamas and secure their right to defend themselves as a nation. However, from a geostrategic global stability perspective, Russia is still the primary concern, with China being a secondary concern. And China is only a secondary concern because they will make their play based on what happens to Russia. So I'm far less concerned about China than I am about Russia. Now, with regard to Iran and Israel, while Iran is absolutely a threat to the regional order in the Middle East and to Israel, I'm very confident Israel can deal with Iran and its proxies, especially with U.S. top cover. And Iran and its proxies in Hamas are not even remotely likely to win the war that they're fighting right now in Israel and Gaza. Iran is not nearly powerful enough to attempt a total domination play in the Middle East, and Israel and a small contingent of Western allies can contain Iran. Furthermore, there are Arab Middle Eastern players that do not side with Iran, specifically Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, Egypt, and Jordan. And frankly, when the chips are down, it's unlikely the United Arab Emirates would support them as well. So Iran is certainly a nuisance, but it is not a threat to global stability. Iran does not have the capability to start World War III, whereas Russia does. Since World War II, Russia has tried to undermine the stability of the global order at every turn because that stability is predicated on US/Western values and power. Values that Russia frankly abhors and has grown angrier with time as former Warsaw Pact nations flee the grips of Russia and beg to join NATO and the European Union. Even to this day, we see that taking place in Ukraine. Furthermore, Russia acts as the testbed for China, willing to do things the Chinese perhaps would like to do, but really need to gauge how the response would be globally. How does the world respond to a larger nation invading a smaller neighbor? That's what China's watching in Russia. China really could not care less about the plight of Israel or Hamas. It is an opportunity for the Chinese to undermine the United States on the global stage through rhetoric. Notice the Chinese really haven't deployed anything of significance to the region, but rather rely on a bunch of blustering noise. China is watching Russia very closely, though, and I'll talk a little bit more about that here in a bit. But Russia, on the other hand, needs American and European eyes on Israel, because when you put eyes on something, you put money towards it. And we're seeing this already. Putin wants the US financial system that is backed by the population's attention focused on Israel because it frees up space for him to breathe with regard to his ongoing war in Ukraine. If Western support for Ukraine disappears, Russia will count that as a victory, whether they take another foot of ground or not, whether they take Ukraine or not. A stalemate to a ceasefire due to a withering Western support tells Russia they won. They will see it as Western weakness in the face of being challenged. A challenge that frankly did not cause any deaths of Western nations in the United States, Canada, France, or the United Kingdom. Western nations would be seen as weak because they couldn't even sustain financial support or equipment support to another country in the face of Russian aggression, let alone send troops. Russia will take that as carte blanche to threaten Estonia, challenging NATO to actually put their money where their mouth is and deploy troops to defend a nation that frankly 75% of Americans probably don't know exists, despite Estonia being a member of NATO. Russia will amplify its nuclear rhetoric and may actually take steps towards nuclear war, daring Washington, Berlin, or London to respond to a nuclear threat over Estonia. Does this mean NATO fractures because there is hesitance among the countries in different factions, whether it's the United States or UK, etc.? I mean, we would likely see the Baltic nations such as Latvia and Lithuania, and possibly even Nordic nations, stand up for their neighbor. But does Western Europe? More importantly, does the United States decide to go to war against Russia over Estonia? Or do we keep letting dominoes fall? Ukraine, Estonia, etc. Because the decision to not fight over Ukraine, the decision to not fight over Estonia means that the decision to not fight over Latvia or potentially over Lithuania is a lot easier to make. Russia recognizes this and will play this game with every neighboring country for the next 2 decades in order to stave off what is their inevitable collapse due to many factors: economic, their population decline, etc. And this is regardless of whether Putin is the one in charge or not. Remember, Russia has the extraordinary capacity to force pain on their population, and that population accepts it. Russia has lost hundreds of thousands of troops and billions upon billions of dollars in Ukraine, and yet they continue on. The Western nations would absolutely not be doing that. We in the US are so wishy-washy that we can't even muster sending old equipment to Ukraine to fight a global order changing foe without whining about it. We are staring the reincarnation of Nazi Germany in the face, but our TV screens show Israel, who, again, I support and who is doing quite well in their fight against Hamas, mind you, rather than our focus where it should be when it comes to total global stability, and that is Russia. Members of Congress who I can only assume are bought by the Kremlin or threatened by the Kremlin with exposure and blackmail can't seem to do the obvious thing necessary to stop this 21st century Hitler, that is Vladimir Putin. Winston Churchill once famously observed that Americans will do the right thing only after they have tried everything else. As I watched the Biden administration slow walk equipment, putting frankly silly restrictions on this equipment, I'm inclined to believe the British Bulldog, who is one of my favorite people in history. If we give up on Ukraine in less than 2 years, we will have to pay for it 100 times over in the next 20 years. Russia, who is absolutely signaling to China what the US and the West is willing to allow. If China sees the United States and the collective West give up less than 2 years in on Ukraine, the Chinese will recognize that it's a mere waiting game when it comes to Taiwan. That for all its might and its expeditionary capability, the US doesn't give a crap when it comes to its allies and its values are challenged around the globe. In all honesty, it is because of U.S. support of Ukraine and the robust and frankly surprising response to Russia that China right now is willing to once again come to the table and have discussions with the U.S. despite a few years of very prickly relations. As of right now, they see the U.S. and its partners as someone not to be trifled with. And we've signaled that through our response to Russia and frankly our response to Israel deploying such a massive amount of combat power to that region after October 7th. But if we give up now, the whole world will take note. Russia and China will see it as carte blanche to do as they please in their backyards. Our allies will be forced to militarize, generating global arms races that will inevitably lead to a devastating global war. All of this can be avoided by ensuring Russia is completely defeated in Ukraine, because this really is Russia's last gasp. If they don't succeed here, they're not going to have the economic nor military strength to execute a similar style of war against anyone else when they know the response from the collective West will be as strong or possibly stronger as it has been with Ukraine, and that we are willing to see it through. Putin incorrectly made the assumption that the glue that held NATO together was weak and that the Western nations, to include the United States, really don't care about the fate of the free world as represented in Ukraine. We need to ensure that we don't give him a reason to believe he was actually right. So when I see comments that come up in my feed that say, we've all moved on to Israel, we're not paying attention to Ukraine, I have to say, I disagree. We need to pay attention to Ukraine. Israel is our ally, and I will continue to do content with regard to what is going on in Israel, but I'm still going to do content on Ukraine because I believe wholeheartedly Ukraine is going to be a much bigger problem if we don't continue to address it.